Greetings, beautiful beings, and welcome to another episode of Paranormal and Proud. I am your host, Serena, and I would like to thank you for joining me for another episode. As my podcast grows, you can find me on more platforms, and you can also find me on Twitter. I will put my link to my Linktree in the show notes and the podcast description. You can also find me on KUAP Digital Broadcasting Troubled Minds Radio. Host Michael Strange has invited me to join his amazing lineup of creators who post amazing shows as far as paranormal and just exploring the unknown and asking questions. And there's some really talented people on there. I would absolutely encourage you to check it out. You can find everything Troubled Minds at troubledminds.org, and if you want to listen to the station, there's a link to hit listen live. Now we shall move on to the show. Tonight, my friends, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different than what I did in the last few episodes. I'm still going to be exploring some paranormal topics, but they're going to be mixed in with a little bit of true crime and a little bit of history. These topics are something that are really important to me, and other than paranormal and paranormal adjacent topics, I do have a big interest in true crime, which most people that know me personally know that I am very versed in it. But that's besides the point. So tonight we are going to be discussing the Satanic Panic. Along with the Satanic Panic, we're going to be covering actual crimes that were claimed to be caused by Satan, by the perpetrators themselves, and some injustices caused by the Satanic Panic, some awful examples of people wrongfully accused due to simply people thinking that they're Satan worshipers. We're also going to be covering a twisted tale of a recent case that was in the news and trial was very publicized, and we're going to be talking about the aspects of that as far as their belief system and why they did what they did, because they did kill for religion, not Satanism. But we'll get there when we get there. This might be a two-parter. I haven't decided yet. When somebody discusses Satan, a lot of times, especially those of modern religions that do believe Satan is a negative entity, they cringe a bit because they were told stories about how evil the devil is, and if you're bad, you're going to go to hell and you're going to burn in fire and brimstone. And that may be true. Honestly, I'm the type of person that I have my beliefs, but I also believe that we're really not going to know until we pass away. There were some people that did kill in the name of Satan, or at least claim to. The example I'm going to use is Richard Ramirez, and he was just a scuzzy, pervy little greaseball that killed and sexually assaulted women who yelled, "Swear to Satan," and when he was in court, he yelled, "Hail Satan." And I honestly believe that he kind of used that as a defense to make them think that he was insane, so he could plead insanity. Thankfully, it didn't work, and instead of spending the rest of his life in a mental institution, he lived out the rest of his days in prison. And then you have somebody like the son of Sam, David Berkowitz. He was murdering people on the streets of New York, and he claimed to be getting messages from Satan himself through his neighbor's absolutely adorable and innocent golden retriever, which we know golden retrievers, they probably wouldn't be the dogs for Satan to talk through. If there were a dog for Satan to talk through, it would probably be something mean like a Chihuahua. No offense to Chihuahua lovers, but those guys can be very vicious. Again, I'm pretty sure he wanted people to think that he was crazy so he could live his life out in a mental institution rather than a prison. And again, that didn't work out for him. He spent his days in jail. The 60s and 70s was what really brought Satanic Panic into the light, or the dark, whichever one you'd like to go with. But pop culture really started bringing the devil into modern society. You have Anton LaVey, who brought in modern Satanism himself with the Church of Satan. And then you've got movies in 1968 like Rosemary's Baby. Before 1968, only about 37% of people believed in Satan as an actual entity. But when Rosemary's Baby came out, people were starting to get a little freaked out. But then in 1973, The Exorcist came out, and I went over that in my Cursed Movies episode, and there was a lot of creepy things that went on there, so I can totally understand. But after The Exorcist came out, over half of the population believed that the devil was an actual entity and was torturing people and throwing fire and brimstone around, and they were terrified, and rightfully so, because the concept of the devil wasn't new, but it mostly stayed in religious settings and discussions, not so much in the pop culture. A lot of people don't know, but there are a few different types of Satanism. There's theistic Satanism, where they actually believe as the devil as an actual entity, Satan, Lucifer, that he is an actual god of the underworld, that he tortures people and they worship him. And then you've got the more modern versions of Satanism. You have the Church of Satan, which Anton LaVey did create in the 60s. And then in 2013, the Satanic Temple came around. And they actually are atheists. They don't believe in the devil as an entity. Honestly, they use Satanism pretty much because they want people to think about it. You know, I've heard them say that when people ask them why choose Satanism, they say, that's the first question. We want you to use critical thinking. And it's kind of genius on their part. A lot of their beliefs basically involve being the best version of yourself, but not taking crap from anybody. And basically, honestly, the golden rule, do unto others what you would want done to you. I'm not an expert in these, but I researched a little bit. So it seems they're pretty benign. They don't, believe in fire-breathing devil. They don't want to hurt people, especially the innocent. They believe in protecting themselves and doing what they have to do to be the best that they can be, but they don't cause harm to innocent people. Anyway, moving on. I'm going to give a little bit of a content warning. I'm not going to be getting into grisly details, but there are going to be suggestions of abuse, sexual assault, sexual abuse. I just want to throw that out there. Just in case you're sensitive to these topics, a little bit of a trigger warning. So we spoke about people who actually claimed to kill in the name of Satan. Well, there's also some examples of the mass hysteria of Satanic Panic. One of the big instances was the McMartin preschool case. Back in August of 1983 in Manhattan Beach, California, a mother of a 2-year-old child believed that he was sexually abused by a teacher at the preschool. The child named a man named Mr. Ray that abused him. Ray Buckley happened to be the son of the daycare owner, Peggy McMartin Buckley. Ray Buckley was arrested in September, and he was jailed, basically, on these allegations. The police took it upon themselves, though, to mail out 200 letters to family members of all of the students that have been involved with the daycare over a several-year period. Experts have said that was the very first mistake they made, because in this letter, they named Ray Buckley as an abuser. And part of the letter said, quote, "Please question your child to see if he or she has been witness to any crime or if he or she has been a victim." So these parents, of course, they were hysterical. And of course they're hysterical. Any parent, I'm a parent, any parent, you want to protect your child at all costs. You want to do everything to keep them safe and innocent as long as you possibly can. So if there is any possibility that somebody is hurting them, you are going to do everything you possibly can to make sure it wasn't them, and if it was them, that the people that hurt them get prosecuted accordingly. So since this information about Ray Buckley as an abuser was leaked, they started interviewing all the children. And unfortunately, rather than just asking them, did anything happen to you? They started asking leading questions, very graphic leading questions, especially for young children. Like, were you part of the naked pictures and the naked parties? And did you see animals getting killed? And a young child wants to please their parents. A lot of children are very blunt and honest and don't know how to lie, but they can be very fantastical when they're making up stories. And when they're having these ideas fed into their head, sometimes they're going to get elaborate and go on tangents about this. I know my daughter, when she gets into it, she can be a heck of a storyteller, but thankfully, nothing like these poor children went through. It's more fantasy stories about princes and princesses and all kinds of fun kid stuff that's appropriate. So a little bit of a soapbox moment. You're going to see all these cases that they use children and people with lower IQs, people who are cognitively disabled, who don't have great critical thinking. They use them to confess things, like either accuse people and say things happen, or even if they suspect said person as of a crime or knows about a crime, they're gonna get them into a false confession. And that is absolutely awful, because as a justice system, we always want the right person that committed the crime to be punished. We don't want to just pull somebody weird that we suspect and say, okay, you're weird, you must have hurt these people. No, it's ridiculous. But anyway, moving on. So the children elaborate about everything from animal sacrifice to going to graveyards to baby sacrifices. Even the staff is dressed up as witches and flying around the daycare. In all, they interviewed over 400 children, and they came to the conclusion that about 360 of them have been abused by 6 teachers that were alleged to be involved. And then also Ray Buckley, Peggy McMartin Buckley, and her sister Peggy Ann Buckley were also accused. Investigators also believe that the teachers also ran a pornography ring. Parents adopted a slogan, "Believe the children," at all costs, whether or not the evidence contradicted the claims. Of course, we want to believe our kids, okay? You hear something awful come out of your child's mouth, you want to believe them, but you also want to make sure that these claims are true and that they didn't hear something, because we know children are very impressionable. So we're going to investigate these claims. We're not just going to jump to conclusions, but we're still going to protect our child at the same time. So hysteria erupted, and basically the parents were calling for a witch hunt. They need to be prosecuted like the witches. Even though there was absolutely no evidence to support these claims, there were indictments to 6 people handed down from the grand jury. They also attempted to indict the 76-year-old grandmother that founded the preschool, but thankfully she wasn't charged with anything. They found no evidence on her either, but I guess the other people's cases were a little bit more convincing. So after all was said and done, these people were acquitted. And the trial lasted 7 years, and it cost over $15 million. As of now, that was the longest and most expensive trial in American history. And it still stands that way. And I hope it still stands that way, because that is just absolutely crazy. To top it off, I didn't even tell you probably the worst part and the saddest part. The mother of the initial child that started throwing around the accusations ended up being diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. And in 1986, she passed away from alcohol-related liver disease. Sadly, she had undiagnosed mental illness and alcoholism that most likely caused her to believe all this is to be true. Mental illness was far tabooer back then than it is today. We have come far in destigmatizing mental illness, but we still have a long way to go. And it's really sad that this could have been squashed in the beginning by realizing this poor woman just needed medical help, essentially. Moving on to our next case, which honestly is quite a doozy for me because I first heard about it some years ago when I first started listening to podcasts. One of the first podcasts I listened to was Last Podcast on the Left, and I really enjoyed them because when they covered true crime, they roasted the bad guys, but they memorialized and respected the victims extremely well. I'm all about roasting criminals and people who have been convicted of horrible acts, along with crooked politicians and crooked officials that are supposed to be helping us, but, do the opposite and help their own interests. Anyway, so the next one we're going to discuss is the case of the West Memphis Three. So this is kind of a heavy one. I am not going to be getting into the grisly details because there are a lot of them. And also, don't Google it because you may end up accidentally coming across some photos of very sensitive crime scene photos. And if you want to learn more about this case, I will put in the show notes the Last Podcast on the Left version. They do an excellent job covering this case. And even if you don't want to listen to them, just type it in your podcast providers, Spotify or Pandora. And there are a lot of other excellent podcasts that cover this. This case is far more tragic because 3 innocent 8-year-old boys were brutally murdered right on their last day of school. This happened in May of 1993 in West Memphis, Arkansas. West Memphis, Arkansas is literally right across the river from Memphis, Tennessee, hence the name. The 3 boys went and played in a wooded area that they played in from time to time. Their parents usually weren't thrilled about them going deep into the woods, but, it was the early 90s and kids could do a heck of a lot more. I mean, I was sheltered. I couldn't really walk around the streets. I lived in kind of a rural area, so it wasn't like I could just bum around at night, thankfully. But I digress. These boys were found murdered the next day in a very awful scene. The victims were Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers. And this year actually is the 30-year anniversary. Actually, earlier this month is the 30-year anniversary of this awful crime. So, of course, everybody was absolutely shattered by this awful murder, and these parents were completely heartbroken, rightfully so. I could not imagine. When the detectives started their investigation, there was one name that one of the detectives spoke of right away, and that was Damien Eccles. Damien Eccles was actually a young teenager, I think 17 or 18 at the time, and he was a weird kid. He was, he was gothic. He wore all black. He listened to metal music and Metallica and Slayer, what have you. And he was into Wicca, which, a lot of people dabbled in. And he had a criminal record, too. Pretty minor, just teenage angst type stuff. He and one of his girlfriends were forbidden from dating, so they tried to run away together. They broke into an abandoned trailer and were found by police. They got charged with breaking and entering. So he was put on parole. He had some mental illness issues and basically was known to be just evil in the neighborhood, which was absolutely unfair. And then there was his friend, which his name was Jason Baldwin. Jason was also kind of a weird kid. I mean, perceived that way back then because they were in the Bible Belt. So anything not clean cut was probably considered negative. So Jason Baldwin, he had a sweet mullet back then and he loved Metallica. And the crazy part is the investigation, part of the reason why they convicted him was he had like 20 some black t-shirts in his closet, so they considered that devil worship. The third boy was Jesse Miskelly Jr., and he really didn't hang out too much with Damien and Jason, but they knew him to be also kind of an outcast, a weirdo. He was cognitively disabled with a low IQ, and they knew that they could probably get a confession out of him, that he must have known something or he must have been involved. They were also in the poorer neighborhood. They lived in one of the trailer parks that was considered kind of a cruddy area, and they were very low income, and they were looked down upon by their community. They questioned all the boys, and of course, Damien and Jason, they knew nothing about it. And Jesse initially said he knew nothing about it until they brought him in for an interrogation. You see, the other boys, they felt like the justice system would do its job because they were innocent. They did not do this. And they believed in our country and our Constitution. So they brought Jesse in for questioning, and they interrogated him for hours and hours and deprived him of sleep and basically lied to him and said, if you tell us what happened, you could go home. And he claimed to know nothing. And then they grilled him and actually started giving him leading information. They would put things in there like, oh, did you hit him? Did you stab him? And if he said something wrong, they would correct him. And then he would go with what they said because he just wanted to go home and be with his family. They even gave him a polygraph, and he passed every single question. The only question he failed was if he used marijuana, and he said no. And what kid wants to admit to something like that? I think they're going to get in trouble from their parents. Especially in the early 90s, the devil's lettuce was quite taboo and frowned upon. The exact words from the investigator was that he was lying his ass off, which he actually wasn't, but they didn't trust him, even though by all accounts he pretty much passed the polygraph. And a side note, polygraphs are not admissible in a court of law. They're just a tool to basically tell if somebody is being honest or not, but I don't think they're accurate, and I think they're more of a tool to scare people, essentially, into confessing. Well, my friends, it looks like I'm going to have to see you on part 2. If you're listening to me on KUAP Troubled Minds Radio, I will see you after the break. But if you're listening to me on a podcast platform, I just need you to click on the next episode. Thanks.